Hello Year 10 and welcome to today's lesson. We're continuing along our theme of algebra, and so far we've been looking at factorising and solving quadratic equations. What we need to do today is be able to solve quadratic equations that do not factorise easily. Okay, that means we're going to be using something called the quadratic formula to help us solve them. You are going to need your maths book today to make sure you can take some notes and answer the independent practice. You may also like to have access to your whiteboard, and you will also definitely need a calculator, a scientific one if possible. If you haven't got that, I suggest you pause the video here and grab it before you go any further. Okay, to start the lesson, can you please pause the video here and have a go at the do now? Okay, the two questions I'd like to look at today are questions 2 and 4. These are a little bit off topic, and I have given you a couple like question 2 previously, and I'd just like to explore how we answer this. Please remember, when you are completing your do nows, if you ever get stuck, you can always access Hegarty to have a look at and see if you can work out how to do something. You could look back over your previous lessons that you had in school to see if you have notes on a topic, and you've also got a methods booklet inside your journal. To answer this question, we first need to know the two formulas for circles. We have area is equal to pi r squared, where r is the radius, and circumference is equal to pi times diameter, where diameter is 2 lots of the radius. So this could also be written as pi times 2r. When choosing which one of these two formulas to use, you'll need to first know whether or not you've been given the diameter or the radius. For this question, we have that the radius is equal to 6 centimetres, so I need to substitute that into each of these two equations. Area is going to be pi times radius squared, so that's 6 squared. This can be rewritten as pi times 36, as that is equal to 6 squared. And we're asked to give it in terms of pi. That means I don't need to be using a calculator. I'm not going to give a decimal. I'm simply just going to give it in terms of pi. To give this in terms of pi, I've swapped these two terms around and I get 36 pi. Remembering that in algebra, when two things are stuck together, that means multiply, so I can take out that multiplication sign. And the only other thing I need is units. We are looking at area. We started with centimetres, so we're going to be in centimetres squared. For the circumference, I'm going to do the same, substitute in r into my formula. It's just a slightly different formula. We're going to have pi times 2 times the radius of 6. This can be rewritten as pi times 12, and in terms of pi, that's going to give me 12 pi. Remembering units, we're not looking at area, we're looking at distance around the outside of the shape, so it's just going to be in centimetres. For question 4, you would have needed to recognise that you will be needing to use Pythagoras. We're given a right-angled triangle, we know two sides, and we're asked to find the third. If you've been given any information about an angle or to look for an angle, you may have been using trigonometry. But for this one, we'll be using Pythagoras. Now, there are two different versions of this formula you might have seen. Most of you will have seen this one. A squared plus b squared equals c squared, which tells me that the square of the two shorter sides added together equal the square of the longer side. Personally, I teach this slightly differently. I still have a squared and b squared, but this time they equal h squared. This is because c is always the hypotenuse. So if you've ever been in any of my lessons, you will have often seen me write it as h squared, because that immediately tells me that the two shorter sides, when squared and added together, are equal to the hypotenuse squared. It really doesn't matter which of these two formulas you use, because they are the same. I just use a slightly different letter at the end there to make it really clear which side I'm talking about. So I'm going to use the formula I like to use. So I have a squared plus b squared equals h squared. H is just a different letter instead of c. I use h because it's the hypotenuse. Substituting in, well, the first thing I would do is actually label each of these sides. A and b are the two shorter sides, and h is the hypotenuse. I could have put b up here and a down here. It doesn't matter which way around I call them. Substituting these in, I get 9 squared plus 12 squared equals, and in this case, I'm actually now going to write x because that's the letter that it's labelled on the triangle. I'm trying to solve for x. Up next, I want to square both of these numbers. I'm going to get 81 plus 144 is equal to x squared. When I add those two numbers together, I get 225 equals x squared. And finally, I need to take the square root of both sides to find just x, which is going to give me 15 equals x. That tells me that x is equal to 15 centimetres. Okay, I'm going to load up the rest of the answers so you can check. Okay, to start today's lesson, can you please write down today's date and title and the key words? The date is going to be slightly different for you. It's not the 13th, it will be the 15th. Okay, so the quadratic formula uses different parts of a quadratic equation to come up with a formula. The formula looks like this. Okay, it looks quite confusing. We have negative b plus or minus b squared, the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. And each of these letters refer to the letters up here. Now, you have seen this before. When we were factorising things, I'd ask you to find ac, and then I'd ask you to find things that sum to b. So you are used to seeing these letters, and they refer to the exact same parts. A is always the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is the constant on the end. Now, these are only the case where it equals 0. So if you are ever given a formula where it does not equal 0, you must first make it equal 0 before you can work out what a, b, and c are. I would always get into a habit of writing down what a is, what b is, and what c is before I start to solve. Once you know these three things and you've written them down, that's really going to help you when you start to substitute into here. Now, you will not get this on your GCSE. This is a formula that you're going to have to learn. I know it looks horrible and I know it looks scary, but the more you practice it and the more you use it, the quicker you will learn it. Later, I will potentially record a lesson showing you how we derive this. Once we've completed a few more lessons and we've looked at completing the square, we can actually prove this and find this from just a generic equation. So you've got two options: either learn it or wait until you've learnt the next skill, and then you can always use that skill to derive it. And that way you can definitely check it. You don't have to be able to derive it. It's just a really good way to help you remember and see how it links into the rest of the maths. So for now, you just simply need to be able to remember it and substitute incorrectly, and that's what we'll be focusing on in today's lesson. So what this does, because we have this plus or minus, that is going to create two separate formulas. So I would always immediately substitute into here and then create my two answers like this. And I'll show you this with an example soon, where I add for one of them and I subtract for the other. And I would simplify these fully, then pick up a calculator and do the final step there. B squared minus 4ac is what we like to call the discriminant, and we will later look at how that links to solving equations. Can I please ask you to pause the video here and write down these 3 bullet points along with the equations into your book? Okay, before we go any further, you need to make sure that you're able to identify A, B and C. The positive or the negative that is put with that number is really, really important. So if I answer question 1 for you, we'll get that A is equal to 2 because it's the coefficient of x squared. B is equal to 11 because it's the coefficient of x. And C is equal to 8 because it's that constant on the end. What I'd like you to do here is pause the video and answer each of these into your book. You can write down the first one as an example and then have a go at the rest, making sure that you're writing down the equation as well as those 3 answers. Okay, here are the answers. Okay, and this one down here should actually have a negative sign in front of it because it is -5 just there. Okay, equally, just like this one here has a -4, it's also -4 there. So the sign is really, really important. Notice on question 5, technically there is a 1 in front of that. We just don't write it in algebra. When we have one lot of something, we don't need to tell you because you can see there is just one of them. So the number there would be A is equal to 1. Okay, so as I said, we're going to be using this quadratic formula where we have an equation that we cannot factorise. Now you could play about with the numbers and you could attempt to factorise and you will come up with a lot of issues. You'll begin to factorise, half it will factorise, half of it won't. You might find some factors of AC, but then you can't find any pairs that add up to B. And that's when you know actually it's not going to factorise. The reason for that is because you're going to have decimal answers. And they're not going to be very nice decimals. It's not going to be 4.5 or 3.5. It could be 4.2679. They're not nice numbers. The way to know whether or not you're going to be using the quadratic equation, or the quadratic formula, sorry, is this key part here. Give your answer correct to 2 decimal places. That is a hint to me that it is not going to factorise. I'm going to be doing something quite complex. I am going to be using my calculator. I'm going to need the quadratic formula. So to start these questions, the first thing I would always do, and for every single question you do today, I want you doing this. The more you write it down, the more you recall it, the more likely you are to remember it, is to write down that quadratic formula. We have x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all of that divided by 2a. So always write that down, even if, as with later in today's lesson, you're going to be answering maybe 10 or 12 questions like this, I still want you to write it down every time. The next thing I want you to do is write down what is A, what is B, and what is C. A is the coefficient of x squared, it's 9. B is 15, and C is 5. Now I want to begin to substitute these into that formula. So I'm going to have that x is equal to negative b, where b is 15, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's going to be 15 squared, take away 4 times a times 5, all of that divided by 2 times a, where a is 9. Up next, you could potentially grab a calculator. I wouldn't. I would still continue to simplify this a little bit more, just because it's going to hopefully reduce the number of errors you make when typing it into the calculator. So I would now say that x is equal to negative 15 plus or minus. Now I would grab my calculator if I didn't know these immediately, but I would work out that 15 squared is 225. And then I'm subtracting 4 times 9 times 5. That is equal to 180. So I'd leave that there. And on the bottom, I would now write 18. I would even go one step further and again simplify this by hand. I would still not yet type it all into my calculator, and I would work out what this section was here and just write it as a number. And it's going to be 45. So I know that x is equal to negative 15 plus or minus the square root of 45 divided by 18. Now I would pick up my calculator and write it in once with the plus, and once with the subtract. And for the first one, this gave me, now it did actually simplify this as a third. If you click the S arrow D button, that will turn it into a decimal because we were asked to correct to 2 decimal places. And this one here is going to give me, I do apologise, I'm running out of room, so they're going to go down here. X is equal to negative 0.46, and I have rounded that to 2 decimal places. For the second one, if you know how your calculator works well, you wouldn't need to type the whole thing in. You can use the arrows around the replay button to move to that plus, delete it and hit subtract. And for my second answer, I get x is equal to negative 1.21. Again, that is 2 decimal places. Can you please pause the video here and write this down as an example? I know there are a lot of lines, there are a lot of steps. The more you practice them, the quicker you will be able to do them later. Okay, and please have a go at the one on the right. Okay, and there are the two answers that I've got. So the first step was to write down the formula, then write down what are A, B and C, substitute in and do as much simplification as you can by hand before then taking my calculator to work out those two answers. Okay, what happens though when some of these numbers are negative? Okay, I have a positive coefficient of x squared, but I've got a negative b and a negative c. Well, I'm going to start the exact same by writing down that formula. So x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. A is 3. B, this time, that negative sign is important. B is negative 8. And C is also negative, and it's 7. I now want to substitute in, and this is where you have to be really, really careful. And this is where you need to be really clear on your negative numbers and how multiplying two negative numbers together can create positives, and a positive and a negative can make a negative. So I want to substitute in. So I'm going to get x is equal to negative b, and I'm actually going to put it in brackets here, remembering that b is negative 8, and I'll deal with those two negatives later. Then plus or minus the square root of b squared. Again, I'm going to put it in brackets, so I know that I'm squaring that negative as well. Then subtract 4 times a, where it's 3, times c, where it's negative 7. And then want to divide by 2a, where a is 3. Simplifying this, I need to remember that when I subtract a negative number, it actually just becomes positive. So that's going to be an 8. Then I still want to add or subtract the square root of any negative number squared is going to become positive. 8 squared is 64. Then I am subtracting 4 times 3 times negative 7. So what I've got here is I've got a negative and a negative. So they are immediately going to make it adding. When I multiply two negative numbers together, I get a positive. And then it's just going to be 4 times 3 times 7. So I'm adding on 84. I'm dividing by 6. I would now simplify this again and get x is equal to 8 plus or minus the square root of 64 plus 84. Can be rewritten as the square root of 148, and then divide by 6. I would then get my two answers by writing it into my calculator. And the answer where I add on that square root comes out as 3.36. And the answer where I subtract gives me an answer of negative 0.69. So the process is the same. You just have to be careful where you end up with double negatives and you're squaring a negative number and you're multiplying negative numbers to make sure that you think slowly and carefully about whether that's going to give you a positive answer or a negative answer. So I encourage you to take your time on these questions and think carefully through how those negatives interact with each other to create your overall answer. Can you please pause the video and write this down as an example? And then please have a go at the one on the right. Okay, notice this time I substituted each of my numbers in, and this step here in the discriminant, this part, negative 12 squared gave me 144. And then when I looked at these three numbers here, I noticed I had one negative and a positive and a positive. That means my overall answer when I multiply these numbers together will remain negative. 4 times 4 times 3 gave me 48. And then simplified it to here, and I've given you the two answers. Okay, please pause the video here and have a go at this question. And there is your answer. Have a go at this one. And there's your answer. Have a go at this one. Be careful to note that in this case, A is negative 4, B is 7, and C is 9. There's your answer. Have a go at this one. There's your answer. Okay, and can you please pause the video here and have a go at these questions? For section A, I need you to write down the values of A, B and C and then use a quadratic formula to find your answers. You're likely to need quite a bit of space for these. Be careful on this one. Something is slightly different here. Think about what is missing, what that means, what you're going to substitute in that case. Then when you get onto section B, you will still probably want to write down what are A, B and C, but that won't be part of the marking. Okay, for this third question over here, if you got stuck, that will be because you'll notice there's only two terms. A is the coefficient of x squared, so that's going to be 8. C is that constant number on the end, it doesn't have any x's with it, so C is equal to negative 7. But the question is, what is B? Well, I don't have any x terms. That means the coefficient of them is 0. If I was to add in here plus 0x, well, that doesn't change the formula anyway, but that makes the coefficient of x 0. So B in this case is 0. So when you substituted in, that would have had an interesting result. Okay, here are the answers for those questions. Okay, I'd like to have a go at a few more. Now, we haven't looked at these yet, so I'd like to go through the first question and just show you how you would start. You need to first write down the formula, and I would still write down the formula. You then want to write down what is A, what is B, and what is C. Okay, and lots of you will make the mistake where you say, okay, well, A is the coefficient of x squared, it's 1. B is the coefficient of x, so it's 7. And C is the constant number, so it's 20. This is wrong. These two are correct, but C is wrong. You must make sure that that initial equation is equal to 0. If it's not, you're going to end up with the wrong signs. So what you need to do is subtract 20 from both sides in this case to get x squared plus 7x minus 20 equals 0. Now that it equals 0, I can write down my three terms. I get A is 1, B is 7, and C is negative 20. So you can see the difference that makes there. Please pause the video and have a go at these questions. And there are your answers. Okay, you've come to the end of today's lesson. Please make sure you pause the video. You don't need to pause the video, sorry. Please make sure you upload a photo of your work to Frog. And you also have a go at the Frog quiz. I will see you next lesson where we will be continuing to look at some more algebra.